I was halfway through my Saturday morning coffee when the quiet of the house exploded into chaos. 1 second. Everything was calm, the kind of peaceful silence you only get in a sleepy neighborhood. And the next, a violent crash ripped through my living room as if a bomb had gone off. The entire wall shook, glass shattered. Something massive tore through the front of my house with a sound so loud it felt like the air itself had split apart. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. My brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Dust floated through the air. Pieces of drywall and wood littered the floor. And right in the middle of my living room, where my couch had been seconds earlier, sat the front end of a giant RV. Yes, an RV. Inside my house. My heart was pounding as I stepped closer, trying to understand how something this insane could even happen. But the real shock came when the driver's door opened and out stepped Karen. The same HOA Karen who had been furious with me just days earlier, all because I refused to let her park that ridiculous RV in my driveway. But trust me, what led to this moment was even crazier than the crash itself. If you had visited our neighborhood before all of this happened, you probably would have thought it was the kind of place where nothing dramatic could ever occur. Quiet streets, neatly trimmed lawns. The occasional dog walker waved politely as they passed by. On the surface, it looked like one of those peaceful suburban pockets where the biggest excitement of the week might be someone repainting their fence a slightly different shade of beige. But every neighborhood has that one person who somehow manages to turn calm into chaos, and in ours, that role was proudly held by Karen. Karen wasn't just a resident. She was one of the loudest voices in the Homeowners Association, and she treated that position like it gave her ownership over the entire street. If someone's grass grew half an inch too tall, Karen noticed. If a trash can stayed by the curb a little longer than she liked, Karen complained. She once walked up and down the block with a tape measure, actually measuring people's lawns to make sure they followed the HOA guidelines. Neighbors joked about it at first, but the jokes slowly turned into frustration. She knocked on doors to criticize paint colors. She left passive-aggressive notes about mailbox decorations. It was like living next to a self-appointed neighborhood inspector who never clocked out. Still, for all her controlling behavior and constant rule policing, none of her usual nonsense prepared me for what she was about to do next. The whole mess really started on an ordinary weekday evening. I had just finished a long shift at work, the kind that drains every ounce of patience out of you. All I wanted was to pull into my driveway, walk inside, and forget the world existed for a few hours. But the moment I turned onto my street, something felt off. My headlights swept across my driveway, and instead of the empty space where my car usually went, there was a giant wall of metal blocking the entrance. At first, my brain honestly struggled to process what I was looking at. Parked across my driveway was the biggest, ugliest RV I had ever seen. It stretched across the entrance like someone had deliberately placed a barricade there. The thing was enormous, bulky, and so aggressively oversized it looked completely ridiculous sitting in front of my house. I stepped out of my car, staring at it like maybe I was misunderstanding the situation. Maybe someone got lost. Maybe it would move in a minute. But before I could even reach the front walkway, I heard that familiar voice behind me. "Well?" Karen said, stepping out from the side of the RV with a proud little smile. "What do you think?" She explained, like she was unveiling a luxury purchase, that she had just bought the RV. The problem, according to her, was that parking it in her own driveway would completely ruin the aesthetic of her home. So naturally, she decided the best solution was to park it in mine. I stared at her for a moment, trying to understand how someone could say something so absurd with such confidence. Finally, I told her calmly but firmly that the RV needed to be moved. It didn't belong there, and it certainly wasn't staying overnight. Karen crossed her arms, instantly defensive. She insisted it wasn't a big deal and that I was overreacting. The conversation quickly turned into an argument, her voice getting sharper while I tried to keep mine steady. Eventually, I just shook my head and stepped back toward my door. "If that RV isn't gone by morning," I told her, "I'm handling it myself." The next morning, I stepped outside hoping, maybe a little naively, that Karen had come to her senses overnight. The sun was barely up, the street was quiet, and for a split second, I thought everything looked normal. Then I glanced toward the driveway and felt that same wave of disbelief all over again. The RV was still there, parked across the entrance like it had grown roots during the night. I pulled out my phone and called Karen immediately. She answered on the second ring, sounding far too calm for someone who was blocking another person's property. I told her as clearly as I could that the RV needed to be moved right now. Instead of apologizing, she snapped back with that same entitled tone, warning me not to even think about touching her vehicle. According to her, if I so much as laid a hand on it, she would make sure I regretted it. Something about the way she said that flipped a switch in my head. I wasn't interested in another pointless argument. If she wouldn't solve the problem, I would. So I called a friend of mine who owned a tow truck. When he arrived and saw the RV blocking my driveway, he actually laughed before getting to work. Within minutes, the chains were hooked up and the massive vehicle was slowly rolling away. I filmed the entire thing on my phone, every angle, every movement, just in case Karen tried to twist the story later. We dropped the RV neatly in front of her garage and drove off. Hours later, my phone buzzed with a message from Karen. Just 3 words. "You'll regret this." Saturday morning arrived with the kind of calm that makes you believe problems have finally passed. Sunlight filtered through the windows, the street outside was quiet, and for the first time in days, I actually felt relaxed. Karen hadn't said anything since that message the night before, and part of me hoped towing the RV had finally made her realize she pushed things too far. I made coffee, sat down on the couch, and tried to enjoy the rare silence. Then I heard an engine. At first it was distant, just a low rumble somewhere down the street. But within seconds, the sound grew louder, deeper, angrier. It wasn't the normal hum of a car driving by. This engine was roaring, like someone was pushing it far harder than they should in a quiet neighborhood. I stood up slowly, a strange feeling creeping into my stomach. The roar suddenly exploded into a violent screech of tires. Before I could even reach the front door, a deafening crash tore through the house. The entire wall in front of me burst inward with a thunderous impact. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and debris flew across the room as something massive smashed straight through the living room like a wrecking ball. I hit the floor hard, coughing as dust filled the air. When my vision finally cleared, the sight in front of me barely felt real. The front end of Karen's enormous RV was sitting inside my living room. The wall was gone. Furniture was crushed. Pieces of drywall and wood were scattered everywhere, and my head throbbed where something had clipped me during the impact. Then the driver's door creaked open. Karen stepped down from the RV like nothing unusual had happened. She brushed dust from her clothes, looked directly at me, and started shouting, "I told you you'd regret touching my RV!" Before I could even fully process the destruction around me, Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 911 like she was the victim in all of this. Standing there beside the RV that had just bulldozed through my living room, she began loudly telling the operator that her vehicle's brakes had mysteriously failed. According to her story, the RV had gone out of control because someone had tampered with it. And somehow she was already hinting that the someone was me. By the time the police arrived, Karen had fully committed to the act. She waved her arms dramatically, pointing at the wrecked wall of my house and insisting she barely survived a terrible accident. She even claimed I had sabotaged the RV after towing it the day before. For a moment, the situation felt surreal. My house was half destroyed, my head was still throbbing, and somehow she was trying to turn the entire thing around on me. But the story didn't hold up for long. Neighbors had already started gathering outside after hearing the crash, and several of them immediately spoke up. One neighbor explained they had seen Karen speeding down the street just moments before the impact. Another confirmed the engine had been roaring like she was flooring it. When the officers asked if I had any proof of previous conflict, I showed them the message she sent the night before. "You'll regret this." Karen's confidence began to crumble as the questions continued. Her story changed again and again, each version making less sense than the last. Eventually, the officers stepped back, exchanged a look, and walked straight toward her. Within seconds, they had her in handcuffs. The entire street watched as Karen started shouting about HOA authority and how everyone would regret disrespecting her. The aftermath of that day unfolded slowly, but the outcome was impossible for Karen to escape. Once the investigation was finished and the evidence was laid out, the situation became painfully clear. She wasn't dealing with a simple accident charge. The authorities stacked several serious accusations against her: reckless endangerment for driving a massive vehicle into a residential home, destruction of property for the damage she caused, filing a false police report for trying to blame me, and even attempted insurance fraud for the story she tried to sell. The court didn't take her behavior lightly. She was ordered to cover every cent of the repairs to my house, along with the cost of temporary housing while construction crews fixed the damage. On top of that, she received jail time, something the judge said was necessary after such a reckless and dangerous stunt. As for the neighborhood, something interesting happened after Karen disappeared from it for a while. The street suddenly felt calmer, quieter, like a storm had finally passed. Looking back now, I still can't believe how far she pushed things over a parking dispute. So I'm curious, do you think Karen got what she deserved? And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more neighborhood drama.